Hey guys, I was thinking about maybe starting a new book, a read aloud for you. Not anything really that we're going to do any work with, but just another one of my favorites that I wanted to read to you. I had talked to you about it some in class. And if you look right here on the screen, you see a picture of the cover of the book that I want to begin reading to you. And the story is called Cracker, which is short for Firecracker, the Best Dog in Vietnam. An author is Cynthia Katahata, and it's a story about a war dog. She's a German Shepherd. It is a female dog. And before we get started, I wanted to share some things with you. We just finished reading Prisoner, and we were talking about World War II and all the issues with Hitler. Interestingly enough, the events of World War II kind of led up to the Vietnam War events and the involvement of the United States government in Southeast Asia and Vietnam. So rather than me explain it to you, it's just way too detailed. I'm just going to show you just a little brief intro, and if you're interested in it, then feel free to do some research. It is known as the lengthiest war that the United States had any involvement in because it did start in the 50s and did not officially end until 1975. We pulled out a little bit before that. The war in the Middle East is rivaling that now, but many of you have grandparents that probably participated in the Vietnam War, some of whom you may have talked to, but for the large part, most vets don't really discuss it too much. But I want to share with you this little clip and then a couple of maps, and then we'll get started with reading Firecracker, the Best Dog in Vietnam. And here's this little clip I want to share with you.
This was the longest war in the history of the United States. Welcome to WatchMojo.com, and today we'll be learning more about the Vietnam War. As part of the Cold War, the Vietnam War was a struggle against communism and an effort to limit its expansion.
If this little nation goes down the drain and can't maintain her independence, ask yourself what's going to happen to all the other little nations.
In 1954, Vietnam was split into two zones at the Geneva Conference. In North Vietnam was the Democratic Republic of Vietnam, which was a communist state led by Ho Chi Minh. South Vietnam was non-communist, and its first president was Ngo Dinh Diem. By mid-1955, Diem initiated a campaign denouncing communism. Suspected communist activities were punished with jail time and even death. His regime lost popularity to the point where a significant portion of South Vietnam supported the communists. This prompted a guerrilla campaign to pop up in the South in late 1956. Named the National Liberation Front, this movement was more commonly called the Viet Cong. As directed by Ho Chi Minh, they used armed propaganda to fight their battles. This targeted violence was initially aimed at politicians, but grew more widespread in the hopes of unifying the country under one communist regime. In an effort to limit the expansion of communism into neighboring countries, the United States began training forces in the South towards the end of the 1950s.
It's their war. They're the ones who have to win it or lose it. We can help them. We can give them equipment. We can send our men out there as advisors, but they have to win it, the people of Vietnam, against the communists.
At this time, with support from the US government, a coup was being discussed to overthrow Diem. However, Diem was executed during the coup on November 2, 1963, without approval from the Americans. His death caused the political climate in the South to destabilize, and each new government toppled quickly. In August 1964, two alleged attacks on American warships were reported off North Vietnam's coast in the Gulf of Tonkin. This gave the US the ammunition necessary to get more heavily involved in the conflict. That year, the number of US troops deployed had risen to 16,500 from only 2,000 a few years earlier. The war escalated, and in March 1965, a series of aerial bombing attacks by US and Vietnamese forces against North Vietnam commenced and continued for 3 years. During that period, Operation Rolling Thunder dropped 1 million tons of missiles, rockets, and bombs on the North. With support from the American public, the U.S. ground war also began in March '65. 3,500 Marines were sent to the South for a defensive mission, and by December, that number had risen to 200,000. However, the ARVN forces of the South experienced great losses in a number of battles over the next few months, and morale dropped. The United States then decided they must intervene even further in order to win the war. Prior to this, they had insisted it was up to the Vietnamese to end things. President Lyndon Johnson and his administration tried to spin the war and its progress in the American media by highlighting stories that showed the war's progression.
All the challenges have been met. The enemy is not beaten, but he knows that he has met his master in the field.
This made the media and the public mistrustful of the government. The Tet Offensive proved to the Americans that progress was not, in fact, being made. On January 31, 1968, the VCs made a surprise attack on the southern Vietnamese and Americans. They responded quickly and effectively. However, the fight raged for months and killed President Johnson's chances of re-election.
I do not believe that I should devote an hour or a day of my time to any personal partisan causes or to any duties other than the awesome duties of this office, the presidency of your country.
By the time he left office, approximately 30,000 American lives had been lost fighting in Vietnam. When President Richard Nixon entered office in 1969, he began withdrawing troops. The policy called Vietnamization was put in place and was meant to help prepare the ARVNs to take over the battle. Amid even more attacks, U.S. public support plummeted further, especially after the National Guard killed 4 student protesters at Kent State University. Peace protests became commonplace on American soil by 1972, and the Vietnam War became a central issue in that year's presidential campaigns. After Nixon's re-election, he was able to negotiate an agreement that ended American involvement in the war.
A ceasefire, internationally supervised, will begin at 7 p.m. this Saturday, January 27, Washington time. Within 60 days from this Saturday, all Americans held prisoners of war
throughout Indochina will be released.
Signed January 27, 1973, the Paris Peace Accords resulted in a ceasefire throughout the country and the release of American prisoners of war. However, fighting between the Vietnamese states continued until 1975. On April 30th, 1975, the South Vietnamese capital of Saigon was taken. The war was over, and communist governments took over Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos.
All right, so, it's very, very complicated, but it's very similar to what we just studied with Hitler because it was still an attempt of communism as government control of the people. And that's why the United States became involved, because the whole reason, obviously it didn't directly affect our country, but the whole reason we became involved was we were trying to help these people resist these governments that would come in and take them over. And we didn't want communism to become strong in the region and take over. Now, if you look at the map here, this is a present-day map, Google Maps, and you see there's the country of China, which you know is a communist country. And, of course, right next to China, there's South Korea and North Korea, which you know North Korea is communist. South Korea is not. It is democratic, just like us. And right here is Vietnam. And the reason I have it all spread out is because I wanted you to perhaps see it's Eurasia. It's how far away it is from us. It's on the other side of the world from us, next to Thailand, Cambodia, and all these things. But as you look, as we read our book, we'll hear about North Vietnam and South Vietnam. We'll hear about it. There used to be a dividing line, and the North was communist, and communist controlled, and the South was democratic and not communist. But the leader that took over that you saw, he was corrupt. So it just kind of led one thing to the other. This city that's called Ho Chi Minh City used to be Saigon, and you'll hear that talked about a lot in the story as we read. And you'll also hear about Hanoi, which has not changed hands. Any of you that your mothers or ladies that like to go and get your nails done, this country of Cambodia, a lot of the, not all, but a lot of the people that we have that run the nail spa salons in Maysville are from Cambodia. And one of the reasons that they fled Cambodia to come to the United States was because the communist regime eventually did take over, and Vietnam was united into one country, but under communist control. And when they did take over, they then took over, and it became a bloodbath in Cambodia and became very difficult for their people. So they did flee Cambodia in the 1980s. I remember hearing about that a lot as a little girl. So anyway, we'll talk about that. But the first setting in our book is going to take place in Chicago. And I know you all know about Chicago. It's a city in Illinois. It's on Lake Michigan. And so here we would be in Maysville, Kentucky, not too far from Cincinnati, between Lexington and Cincinnati. And there's 75, the interstate, and all the way up there in Chicago. And the little boy that is one of the main characters at the beginning of the book, and you'll be in there throughout the book, this is where he lives. This is where we start out with Cracker, the best dog in Vietnam. Okay. All right. And again, the author is Cynthia Katahata. Grr. I am the all-powerful Cracker. Cracker spotted a bird carcass lying in the alley. She picked it up between the tips of her front teeth and flipped it into the air, growling as it sailed above her. When it plopped down, she pushed at it with a paw. She growled more, and then leaned the side of her head on the asphalt, staring right into its face. It might have been dead for a week, but who cared? She'd kill it again. That's how powerful she was. She hopped to her feet to attack it and spotted a mouse, alive. This was for real. She took off. Somewhere in the background, she heard a voice calling, "Cracker, Cracker, Cracker." The mouse had a head start, but she would catch him. She bounded forward and leapt through the air just as the mouse slipped through a chain-link fence. She reared up and pawed higher on the fence, pushing wildly at the metal to search for weakness. The mouse didn't move, just sat in the dirt. Cracker whined. She even licked the fence in the place where the mouse had slipped through. She thought she could just taste his fur. She reached her paw into the loose area of chain near the ground, but the mouse just sat out of reach. It was as if he were taunting her now. She was going to kill that mouse. She stared at him as hard as she could. There was nothing in the world except her and that mouse. "It's just a mouse," Willie said, out of breath from chasing her. "It's dead. D-E-A-D. Dead." Cracker stared. She'd almost forgotten about Willie. But he didn't sound angry. Her ears perked. She could hear Willie's mother calling. Willie picked up a stick and poked at the mouse, sending it scampering. "Huh?" Cracker looked at Willie sorrowfully. Why had he made the mouse go away? "Oh, stop it," said Willie. Then he said, "Good girl," rubbing Cracker's head. All thoughts of the mouse drained quickly from Cracker. She wagged her tail. Good girl. She didn't even glance at the bird as she and Willie trotted toward home. Who cared about a dead bird? Willie petted her head again. "Shake," Willie said, and she fell over. No, that was play dead. She leapt up in the air and ran in a circle around him. He laughed, and they continued down the alley. Willie felt invincible as he walked with Cracker. His mother was used to a better neighborhood and didn't like them walking through the alley in the evenings. but Cracker's muscles were stronger than any man's, and Willie always felt safe with her. Willie's father had worked as a foreman of a taffy apple factory, but when he was laid off, they'd had to move to an apartment while he worked a lower-paying job, and the apartment didn't allow dogs. The landlord had given Willie's family 1 month to get rid of Cracker. That was 25 days ago. Willie felt a sharp pain in his stomach at the thought. Cracker felt Willie's unhappiness and whined. When they stopped in front of their apartment building, Willie suddenly fell to the ground in front of her and hugged her so hard it actually kind of bothered her neck. What was going on? "You're the best dog in the world," Willie said. "Good girl." Willie stood up again and looked sadly at Cracker. Anxiety filled her. She jumped up and placed her paws on Willie's shoulders, almost knocking him over. Willie cracked a smile, and Cracker felt a little better. At the top of the stairs, she scratched at the door to his third-floor apartment. She could never open that door. Willie had to use his key. Every day he did the same thing, held up the key and said to her, as if she were slow-witted, "Key, need key." At the other place they'd lived, the door had pushed open when she grabbed her paws just right around the knob. Willie opened the door and immediately headed for the bathroom. "Mom, I'm going to take a bath." He didn't want his parents to see him crying. They already felt bad enough. But he hesitated just inside the bathroom, as he thought maybe he did want them to see him crying. Maybe then he would be able to keep Cracker. But he knew that wasn't true. He'd already cried a lot. Nothing had changed. Crying wouldn't get his father's job back. He closed the door. "All right," he could hear his mother call out. She and his dad were watching TV. He took off his Cubs jacket. As far as Willie was concerned, the Cubs were going to win this year's Eastern Division, and Willie thought about them almost as much as he thought about Cracker. Some people thought the stupid Mets or Pirates would win the division. Willie wasn't allowed to use the word stupid out loud, but he liked to think the word to himself whenever he felt annoyed. He'd heard his father use the word just once during an argument with his mother about the Vietnam War. His parents, uncle and aunt, were all playing bridge, and then all of a sudden they were yelling about the war. There were several 100,000 American troops in Vietnam, and every day the news reported protests against the war. Ever since Willie's favorite cousin Derek had been drafted, Willie wrote all his school current events reports about Vietnam. Willie's father supported the war, and his mother didn't. And when the job layoff and the move, well, things weren't going that well for Willie, except for the fact that Cracker was a girl and Willie was a boy. Cracker and Willie were, as his mother liked to say, peas in a pod. They both weighed 110 pounds, and they were almost the same age. Willie was 11 in human years, and Cracker was 1 year and 4 months, which Willie had decided was actually 11 in dog years. They both had sandy brown hair and the exact same shade. And Mom also pointed out that Cracker and Willie thought alike. For instance, they probably agreed on 2 of the biggest problems in their lives: that they lived in a small apartment without a yard, and that Willie went away for several hours a day. But once Willie came home from school, life was pretty much perfection, even without a yard. They went out to play with the neighborhood kids until dark, came inside for dinner, and went outside for a walk, and then slept on their twin bed together. And now Cracker was about to make Willie's life miserable, but he just smiled at her. He tried to tell her, but she hadn't understood. Cracker felt life was bliss too, though it wasn't quite perfect, and for precisely the same reasons that Willie's mom thought. Furthermore, Cracker considered Willie a bed hog. But if Cracker held her ground, Willie behaved himself and squeezed up against the wall while she stretched out across the bed, with maybe just a paw or two hanging over the edge. Cracker liked to feel Willie's back against hers. She also liked it when he slept with his arms around her. Bliss. On evenings of the 3 weekends they'd so far lived in this new place, Willie's parents let them sleep on the floor in the small front room that jutted out with windows on 3 sides. It was like floating in a boat through the apartments of Chicago. Cracker knew this because she and Willie had been on a boat together once. They both liked that. She liked water. She liked it at the lake, and she liked it in the bathtub. Willie started water going. She didn't see why she couldn't get in the tub with Willie. She jumped halfway in the tub and licked Willie's face. Willie heard his mom calling out, "Sweetheart, please don't let Cracker in the bathtub. Her hair clogs the drain." "Yeah, Mom," he grunted as he pushed Cracker out of the tub. When she gave him a forlorn look, he said, "Maybe if my dad takes me to the Cubs game Saturday, Mom will take you out for a walk. But don't pull hard on the leash." Willie knew that the Cubs weren't even in town this Saturday, but the lie made him feel better. Cracker's ears perked up at the words walk and leash, but she relaxed again as Willie kept talking. "If she doesn't take you out, I'll take you for an extra long WALK when we get back." Cracker jumped up. She loved it when they went on a WLK. That was the same as a walk. Willie dunked under the water with his eyes open, watching the ceiling waver. He stayed under until he couldn't hold his breath any longer. He was lying to her. By Saturday, Cracker would no longer be his dog. He'd begged everyone he knew, and his parents had even taken out a newspaper ad, but neither he nor his parents could find a new owner for Cracker. They'd taken her to the pound, but then when they got there, he couldn't give her up. The pound told him that she would probably end up getting put down. Hardly any of the dogs were adopted. In the bathtub, Willie came up for air. Cracker was licking one of her front paws. She'd been doing that ever since they moved to the apartment, and she'd actually licked away a raw spot. That's how Willie knew Cracker was worried. When Willie had checked his own newspaper ad, he noticed another. The U.S. Army needed German Shepherds and Labs to go to Vietnam. Willie hopped out of the tub and dried off. He pulled on his pajamas, and Cracker followed him into their bedroom. He didn't even call out good night to his parents, just shut the door and got in bed. Willie pressed up against the wall, and Cracker stretched out across the rest of the bed. He lay with his eyes open. Tomorrow, Cracker would be on her way to dog training school and then to Vietnam, where she could serve her country and, more importantly, live. Hopefully, live. Cracker sniffed at Willie as he drifted off. Something was wrong with him lately. He was acting funny, and that made him smell a little different. Whatever was wrong with him made her feel kind of sad. She stood up on the bed and pushed her nose onto his cheek, then lifted her nose a bit and sniffed at him. She did smell a little bloody spot on his knee, but she didn't think that was what was bothering him. She lay down lethargically. Whenever Willie didn't feel good, she didn't feel good either. Cracker opened her eyes when Willie's parents walked into the room. She thought they were going to scold her, as they sometimes did, for taking up so much space, or for being wet, or something. Except for scolding, they hardly ever paid much attention to her. Now they petted her head and scratched her ears and called her good girl over and over. That was nice. Weird, but nice. Then they left. Cracker stared a moment at the crack of light under the door. She felt even more disturbed than before. She licked her paw for a while. But Willie was here, and everything was peaceful, until finally she fell asleep. In the morning, as always, Willie rushed around the apartment. He fed Cracker, took her out to run a few times up and down the alley, took her home, and changed her water. Then, instead of running out the front door with his books, he threw his arms around Cracker's neck and hugged her so hard she squirmed and had to pull away. Willie's mother hovered over them. Cracker whined, completely confused. "Willie, you poor thing," said Willie's mother. "Why don't you stay home today?" "I can't watch," he said. "I don't want to watch them take her." Cracker pawed at his shirt so hard her nails ripped through the material. Uh-oh. She didn't move for a moment, but nobody scolded her. Things had gotten really weird around here. Willie took her face in his hands and said, "Bye, Cracker. You're going to be the best dog in Vietnam." Then he ran out the front door with his books. When Willie hurried down the sidewalk in the mornings, Cracker liked to watch out the third-floor window in the boat room. She always felt the same sadness and slight sense of abandonment. Today, she yelped at him as she watched his back. Instead of turning around, he started to run. She yelped more. Willie didn't even stop to wave before turning the corner and going wherever it was he was going. He'd always waved before. His mother petted her more than she ever had before. A lot of time passed before she said, "You're a wonderful dog." Cracker whined and felt the urge to lick her raw spot. Then his mother left for wherever it was that she went all day. After everybody had gone, Cracker always just lay around in the apartment. Her biggest decisions were whether to sleep in the bedroom or the boat room. She wasn't allowed in the living room. And whether to sneak a pee somewhere that Willie's parents wouldn't find it. She did this only once, but she thought about it a lot. On this particular day, Cracker decided, 1, not to sneak a pee that morning, and 2, to sleep in the bedroom. Willie would be gone for a while, so she made herself comfortable. For some reason, he always pulled the sheets and covers evenly over the bed before he left. It wasn't comfortable that way. Before she lay down, Cracker pawed and pawed at the covers until they were perfectly scrunched up in the middle. She snuggled into the covers and fell asleep. She lifted up her head when she heard Willie's parents come home and a strange man talking with them. That was odd, but Cracker was only mildly interested. She was Willie's, and Willie was hers, and nothing else much mattered. She started getting more interested, a lot more interested, when Willie's father walked into the bedroom carrying a leash and a leather contraption. This was not usual procedure. Still, Cracker learned to tolerate Willie's parents, even listen to them. A couple of times, Willie's father had taken her to a place where a man poked and prodded her. So when the leather slipped over her nose, she didn't growl at all or even protest. The leather prevented her from opening her mouth wide enough to bite. She could have knocked Willie's father right to the ground. And actually, the thought did flash through her head. But she rejected that possibility pretty quickly. Even when he slipped a chain around her neck and pulled it tight, she figured he might be taking her to that place where she would be poked and prodded. Something felt wrong, but she basically trusted Willie's father. When they reached the living room, however, Cracker saw a stranger in a uniform, and she smelled something uneasy in the air. People smelled different, acted different, and looked different, and just plain were different when they felt uneasy. Willie's mother was crying. Willie's father and the man in the uniform looked at the ground. Cracker was stronger than Willie's father, as well as stronger than the new man. She was probably stronger and definitely faster than both of them put together. She didn't like the way this new man smelled. She started to snarl. That always scared people. She tried to open her mouth and then snarled even louder. Willie's father responded by handing the leash to the man in the uniform. He cooed, "Nice dog. Good girl, Cracker." She snarled again and began to lunge at the man, who jerked hard on her chain. Cracker heard a very uncourageous squeal from her own throat. She tried to pull away, but the man jerked back even harder this time, and the same squeal involuntarily jumped from Cracker's throat. The funny thing was that the man didn't seem mean, just firm. He said, "Sit." "No, sit." Finally, Cracker sat. The man looked at Willie's parents and said, "She'll do well in Vietnam." "Thanks for packing her up for us," said Willie's mother. "We just couldn't bear to do it ourselves." Willie's father said, "She's smart as the dickens. Stubborn, though. She and Willie flunked out of obedience school twice. She needs a good handler to really teach her right. She's strong, too. Feel her muscles." Willie's father reached down to squeeze one of her legs. "I'll take your word for it," the man said. "Don't worry. The Army will take good care of her." Willie's father said, "Good luck, Crack." The man laid a hand on the front doorknob. Cracker knew she shouldn't have let Willie's father put the chain and the leather on her. She trusted Willie's parents only because they were Willie's parents. But she trusted Willie because he was Willie. He would help her as soon as he got home. The man took his hand off the doorknob and shook hands with Willie's father. "Let your son know. She'll do fine." Cracker could see he was planning to take her somewhere. She growled and started to leap at him. The man jerked the chain upward, briefly hanging Cracker in the air. She felt her throat constrict, and for a moment, everything went black.